Venezuela has condemned the accusations launched by US President Donald Trump as a means to divert attention from the COVID-19 crisis in the United States. More than 800 people have died from the COVID-19 disease in a single day in the United States, which has the highest number of confirmed coronavirus cases in the world. A first batch of COVID-19 testing kits arrived in Brazil from China. Meanwhile, the Russian government sent a plane carrying humanitarian aid to the United States this Wednesday. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, I'm Katrina Goss. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has condemned the false accusations launched by Washington against his government. Maduro stressed that the latest US attacks on Venezuela are a move to distract attention from the health crisis in the United States, sparked by the novel coronavirus. Following the announcements of the Trump administration regarding the deployment of Navy ships close to Venezuelan coasts, supposedly to tackle drug trafficking, Maduro stressed that US ally Colombia is the real source of drug trafficking in the region. The president also reported that Venezuela was the first country in Latin America to adopt a nationwide lockdown and expressed his hope that as long as the population continues to follow the measure in a disciplined manner, in a few weeks the country will have overcome the first 3 stages of the outbreak and be able to start to return to normal. US President Donald Trump announced that the United States will deploy anti-drug Navy ships near Venezuela in what is the latest move in an escalation of the aggression against the Venezuelan government of Nicolas Maduro. According to Defense Secretary Mark Esper, the mission involves sending additional Navy warships, surveillance aircraft and special forces teams to nearly double the US counter-narcotics capacity in the Western Hemisphere, with forces operating both in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific. Esper said the mission would be supported by 22 partner nations. The move comes after the indictment by the US Justice Department last week of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and other high-ranking officials accused of narco-terrorism, drug trafficking and money laundering. The Trump administration is ramping up its pressure against Venezuela in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, with the State Department issuing a plan for a transitional government in the country on Tuesday. Venezuelan Vice President for Communications Jorge Rodriguez read out a statement by the government of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela condemning the recent statements by US President Donald Trump, his Defense Secretary and Attorney General regarding supposed drug trafficking by Venezuelan officials.
Beyond the aggression of the lies spouted against officials of the government of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, we welcome the fact that for the first time in decades, the United States authorities are taking measures to guard its borders, historically impermeable, neglected and vulnerable, faced with the thousands of tons of drugs that enter the country each year from the drug industry that has been developed in the territory of its ally and close partner, Colombia.
De su aliado y cercano socio, Colombia.
Venezuelan Vice President for Communications, Culture and Tourism, Jorge Rodriguez, offered an update on the meeting of the Presidential Commission overseeing the efforts to combat the COVID-19 virus in the country. Rodriguez noted that a meeting was held with Chinese experts who arrived in Venezuela together with a shipment of medical supplies to combat the coronavirus. He also announced a further confirmed COVID-19 case, bringing the total to 144. So far, 43 people have recovered from the virus in Venezuela, while 3 people have lost their lives. The Venezuelan official called on young people to take extra care, as the majority of cases confirmed in the country are of young people, in contrast to other nations. The Cuban government has implemented over 200 measures as part of its plan to control the novel coronavirus epidemic in the country. The Ministers of Public Health, Transport and Communications offered an update on the implementation of the new provisions, which include the request for all foreign vessels to leave Cuban territorial waters, the suspension of the arrival of all aircraft to the country, except for humanitarian aid, missions and trade, and the cancellation of the annual May Day March. Mobile and landline phone costs will also be reduced to help Cubans stay in touch. The Ministry of Public Health expressed their understanding of how the pandemic is developing across the world and in Cuba itself is required to ensure risk perception. Meanwhile, the US blockade against Cuba prevented the country from receiving a plane carrying medical supplies and aid from China on Tuesday. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermúdez denounced on his Twitter account that Cuba was prevented from receiving a donation of medical supplies to fight the COVID-19 virus from the Chinese Alibaba Foundation due to the regulations of the criminal United States blockade against the island. The aid was sent by Chinese entrepreneur and philanthropist Jack Ma and included a donation of masks, rapid diagnostic kits and ventilators intended for COVID-19 patients and Cuban medical staff. The Chinese businessman has sent aid to 24 Latin American countries, including Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Ecuador, the Dominican Republic and Peru. Díaz-Canel described the event as an attack against the human rights of the Cuban people. The restriction comes after US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo claimed on Tuesday that US sanctions on sovereign nations do not affect the supply of medicines or food. In Ecuador, social organizations from the province of Guayas have condemned the concealment of the real number of victims of the novel coronavirus. At the same time, they've called on the WHO and the international community to undertake inspections and provide aid. On Wednesday, Ecuador reported over 2,700 positive COVID-19 cases and 93 deaths. Guayas is home to around 70% of the COVID-19 infections registered by the government of Lenin Moreno, which states that Guayas has seen 51 deaths and over 1,500 positive cases of the novel coronavirus. The coordinator of social movements in Guayas state denounced that the government has no interest in investigating the real number of fatalities. Meanwhile, social movements and the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights are keeping a record that depicts the tragedy that this Ecuadorian state is experiencing. This Wednesday, a first batch of COVID-19 testing kits arrived in Brazil, where more than 6,000 cases and over 200 fatalities have been confirmed. The test kits were purchased from a Chinese company by a private Brazilian firm. The Vale mining company was also involved in the transaction. The first shipment contains 500,000 rapid test kits, offering results in just 15 minutes. A total of 5 million tests have been purchased. The initiative came in the midst of the lack of response to the pandemic from the Jair Bolsonaro government, which has been widely criticised for its handling of the crisis. Brazil is one of the Latin American countries most affected by the COVID-19 virus, but President Jair Bolsonaro continues to minimise the dangers of the pandemic. Meanwhile, local governments and the population itself are adopting measures and staying at home. More details from our correspondent, Andre Vieira.
Rio de Janeiro is the second city with the most deaths caused by the COVID-19. And since last week, trade is closed as a way to decrease the circulation of people. In the meantime, according to experts and local parliamentarians, that is not enough.
There is no decision to stop non-essential activities. For example, different factories and offices that should be closed are operating.
From the favelas of Rio come important examples of solidarity in the midst of the pandemic. The collectives Papo Reto and Voces da Comunidade de la Favela Alemão transform a shop into a cabinet of crisis, where they receive food and distribute it to the people who need it. In another favela, La Mare, the citizens form the front of Articulation Mare, which uses banners, posters and a car with speakers to alert the population.
Those messages have care guidelines such as washing hands, keeping houses ventilated, etc. But we also pass prevention and care messages with things that people should do if they have or live with someone who is from the risk group or present symptoms of the disease.
If the empty streets and the actions in the favelas show that the people are collaborating in the fight against the COVID-19, President Jair Bolsonaro is the worst example for citizens of the country, according to health specialists.
The President of the Republic is not capable, not responsible, and does not contribute to the fight against the COVID-19. And on the contrary, he has promoted people to go to the streets.
The recommendation comes from health professionals. Stay home.
Since in the health units we are preparing the population for that, because it is not a simple flu, and it is something very serious, and we need the effort of the whole society.
According to a study by the Imperial College of London, if life returns to normal, as the president defends, more than 1 million Brazilians may die due to the COVID-19. But Brazilian and local governments promise to follow the sanitary recommendations and not allow this to happen. André Vieira and Sebastián Soto, Telesur, Brazil.
More stories coming up after this short break, so don't go away. Welcome back. More than 800 people have died from the COVID-19 disease in a single day in the United States, which has the highest number of confirmed coronavirus cases in the world. New York State is the worst affected in the US, and its health infrastructure is in crisis. Meanwhile, more than 1,400 members of the New York Police Department have tested positive for COVID-19. The shocking statistics were reported on Wednesday morning after NYPD Commissioner Dermot Shear confirmed that 5 members of the nation's largest police force have now died from the disease. On Wednesday, 17% of the department's uniformed force were reported sick. Meanwhile, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis issued a stay-at-home order for the entire state on Wednesday to slow the spread of the coronavirus after weeks of refusing to take bold measures. Florida has reported more than 5,000 positive cases. The novel coronavirus has caused over 43,000 deaths and infected more than 900,000 people worldwide. And our correspondent in the US, Jorge Gestoso, brings us more on the situation there.
Thank you. After weeks of resistance, finally the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, issued an order for the population to stay at home given the increase of cases of coronavirus in its state. On the other hand, the captain of the aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt, with a crew of 4,000 people, is absolutely frustrated because he has in the ship at least 4 cases of coronavirus, people who has tested positive, and he has received the order not to dock with them in order to have that ship always ready at any minute. Given the fact that President Trump has been criticized for his slow response to this crisis, this morning the Vice President Mike Pence has blamed again someone else, in this case China and the CDC, the Centers for the Control of Diseases, as responsible for that. And on the other hand, we're talking that there is more and more awareness of the population of the US once that yesterday President Trump announces that the 2 coming weeks are going to be, he said, very, very hard for the US. The advisors in terms of the health experts talking about 100,000 to 240,000 deaths are going to anticipate that are going to happen, and that if the measures to mitigate the virus could be taking place, if not, could reach even up to 2 million. On the other hand, hospitals continue to be absolutely overwhelmed, and doctors and the professional team are always saying that there's not enough ventilators, not enough kit of tests of the virus, not enough gloves, not enough masks, and most definitely they believe that that is going to contribute to the increase of the numbers. The numbers are absolutely staggering because we're talking that we're passing the 200,000 cases of people infected known and more than 4,500 deaths. We get back to you now.
The US Defense Secretary has refused to evacuate a US aircraft carrier with 5,000 people on board exposed to the COVID-19 virus. The captain of the USS Roosevelt aircraft carrier, which has an unconfirmed number of people on board who have tested positive for COVID-19, has called for help to save the lives of his sailors. The carrier was in the Pacific when the Navy reported its first coronavirus case a week ago. It has since pulled into port in Guam, a US territory in the Western Pacific. A 4-page letter written by the ship's captain describes a bleak situation on board due to a lack of enough quarantine and isolation facilities, and calls for decisive action and the evacuation of over 4,000 sailors from the ship to avoid further cases and fatalities. Heavy rain led to the flooding of homes and streets in the province of Castellón in the Spanish coast, as residents remain on lockdown due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Firefighters had to drive through deep floodwater overnight to rescue a woman trapped by the rising waters. The towns of Almasora, Burriana and Villafranca were particularly badly hit. The heavy and persistent rains that have occurred in the past 24 hours have left historical records, such as the 150 litres per square metre measured in the Observatory of Castellón, which is the highest daily rainfall in the province since 1962 and the 5th highest since 1911. The UK has recorded its biggest daily rise in the number of COVID-19 deaths so far, taking the death toll to over 2,300 on Wednesday. The Department of Health and Social Care said that the UK has reported almost 30,000 positive COVID-19 cases. The latest figures come amid accusations that the UK government is failing to ramp up coronavirus testing quickly enough for frontline healthcare workers in particular, as well as the wider community. The government has set a target of carrying out 25,000 tests a day by the end of April. Meanwhile, 4 cabinet members have self-isolated after showing symptoms, as concerns rise that ministers had not been following their own rules on physical distancing. The Russian government this Wednesday sent a plane carrying humanitarian aid to the United States to combat the COVID-19 crisis. The shipment of medical supplies on a military transport plane was organised by the Russian Defense Ministry following a phone call between President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. The humanitarian aid includes COVID-19 rapid test kits and masks, while a Russian team of experts was also deployed to help treat coronavirus patients. The move demonstrated Moscow's solidarity despite the ongoing US sanctions imposed against Russia. Major stock markets in Europe and Japan this Wednesday saw a sharp fall due to the uncertainty sparked by the coronavirus health crisis. Experts estimate that the global economy is heading towards a deep recession due to the coronavirus pandemic. Major losses have been recorded in stock markets in Europe, Asia and Wall Street. European stock markets opened the second quarter of the year with a drop of more than 3% following a stoppage of manufacturing activity. The same was the case in the Tokyo Stock Exchange, which recorded a fall of more than 4%, representing the biggest economic slump in years. And we're taking one last break now, but stay with us for more. Welcome back. WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said on Wednesday he expected the amount of confirmed novel coronavirus cases around the world to reach 1 million in the next few days. He also forecast that the global death toll would rise to 50,000. During a video conference from Geneva, he recalled that over the past 5 weeks, there has been a near exponential growth in the number of new cases, reaching almost every country.
Many countries are asking people to stay at home and shutting down population movement, which can help to limit transmission of the virus, but can have unintended consequences for the poorest and most vulnerable people. I have called on governments to put in place social welfare measures to ensure vulnerable people have food and other life essentials during this crisis.
The coronavirus epidemic in South Africa has killed 5 people and infected over 1,300, according to the health minister, who said the spread of the virus was not as rapid as expected. Health Minister Sweli Mkhize said despite huge backlogs at lab services, almost 40,000 tests have been conducted as the country entered the 5th day of a 21-day lockdown in a bid to contain the outbreak. President Cyril Ramaphosa's government has enforced a nationwide military-patrolled lockdown since last Friday. Police say they have made hundreds of arrests of people violating the measure. South Africa, which has the highest number of confirmed coronavirus cases on the continent, will start mass door-to-door screening and testing for COVID-19 within the next few days. Among the measures that the Kenyan government has adopted to slow the spread of the coronavirus are the closure of the country's borders and schools, while the population is being encouraged to stay at home and avoid large gatherings. A curfew was also imposed on Friday, and reports that police have used heavy-handed tactics to enforce it have led the president to issue an apology.
Especially when we introduced the curfew, maybe in the initial stages there were some challenges. And I want to apologize to all Kenyans, maybe for some excesses that were conducted.
Starting Monday and for 3 weeks, Zimbabwe will be on lockdown to try to stop the spread of the COVID-19 virus. The country's 16 million inhabitants have been urged to stay home, while the last official report presented put the number of infected people at 8, one of whom passed away. The population faces a critical situation, with many in the capital lacking drinking water in their homes and having to go out to neighbourhood wells to get it. The economic crisis that has hit Zimbabwe for the past 2 decades, aggravated by US sanctions, has destroyed public services, including water distribution, and caused a shortage of all kinds of products, putting the population on the edge of famine. There are now over 5,800 confirmed novel coronavirus cases across the African continent. A number of African nations have already imposed a range of prevention measures against the spread of the pandemic. According to the latest data from the Africa Centers for Disease Control, there has been a rise in cases, and only a handful of countries are still holding out. So far, 201 deaths have been reported, and over 430 patients have recovered. In total, 49 countries have reported cases, and only 5 remain virus-free: Sao Tome and Principe, Malawi, Comoros, Lesotho, and South Sudan. And we finish this news brief with images of Chinese medical workers returning home and being reunited with their loved ones after having been deployed to Hubei province to tackle the COVID-19 virus. Don't forget to follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For TeleSur English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.手中的平凡。